The movie begins and we meet Neil, who is woken up to an angry neighbor complaining that his dog is barking. He then enters back into his apartment and takes his dog Dennis for a walk. On the way downstairs we meet another one of his neighbors, Catherine, who he says he just dreamed about. The movie then changes to outer space in which we see aliens. The next day we see Neil and he works as a teacher in a school. It then turns back to the aliens who are planning on destroying the Earth. As Neil is in the supermarket he hears someone crying, so he checks up on them. He tries to make a joke which doesn't work, so instead he gives her a tissue and she leaves the store. The aliens are talking about Earth and say they are gonna randomly pick someone to give power to, meaning they can do anything they want in the world, and to see if they use their powers for good or for evil. The random person that is picked to have powers is Neil, and he has 10 days to prove if he's gonna use his powers for good or for evil. As he's riding to school he gets ran over and his bike breaks, but whilst he isn't paying attention he starts getting the powers in his hand. In the next scene Catherine is having a drink with her friend in which they talk about Neil, and her friend has the impression he's gay. Neil makes it to school late, so he tries to sneak past the head teacher's office, but the head teacher hears him and tells him off for being late 12 times in the past year. As he makes it to his class he looks inside and sees the kids misbehaving, so he decides to not enter and read a newspaper. At lunch we see Ray and he says to one of the teachers to go out with him tonight, in which she replies drop dead. Ray sits down with Neil and asks him if he had any power what would it be, and he says alien spaceships to destroy and kill everyone in his class. He then runs to his class in which he sees that it has been destroyed. When he gets home he listens to the news talking about the school. He then says to Dennis that he didn't cause the attack in school and said that if he had powers he'd make the dog mess go away itself. Right as he says that, the dog mess starts walking and goes into the toilet. Neil starts getting paranoid and decides to start drinking. He then shortly realizes that any wish he wants he needs to wave his hand. He then tells the whiskey to exchange itself for a new bottle, in which it does. The bottle heads towards the store and Neil and Dennis follow it. The bottle breaks into the store, so Neil and Dennis run away only to get stopped by police, so Neil makes a wish to be at home eating with Dennis. He then makes another wish to make everyone be alive again, so people start getting out of their graves and walking around. He realizes what he has done and changes the wish so that anyone that died in the attack at school was alive again and to have completely forgot about it. The next day in school it's the exact same day, and he gets asked the same questions. He heads to his class to see everyone is alive again. He makes a wish that everyone in his class behaves and does their work, in which they do. He also makes another wish that makes the headmaster be nice to him for once. Whilst Catherine is at work her ex comes to see her and she tells him to leave. Neil makes a wish so that a teacher worships Ray. He also makes a wish so that he becomes president of the United States. He then changes his wish so he becomes a normal person again. That following night he makes some changes to his appearance and body. He then makes a wish to see Catherine from downstairs. The next day he explains to Ray that he has a power and shows him by making a skeleton talk and changing the room to flowers. We also see that the teacher still worships Ray. The aliens have a problem with the power they are giving to Neil, so it stops working for a bit. Neil wakes up and still thinks he has power, so he makes a wish that Catherine is madly in love with him, but she was already going to knock on his door. Catherine and Neil kiss whilst Catherine's ex watches, then he falls down the pipe. The next day the aliens get the power working again, and when he wakes up he tells his clothes to put them on by themselves. After he puts his clothes on he decides to eat breakfast and read books, and his dog won't start barking, so he lets him be able to speak, and he starts saying that he wants biscuits. Neil then goes to the kitchen and gives Dennis a biscuit. Then he hears a knock at the door, which is Catherine. She then comes into his apartment, and whilst she's in there she can hear someone speaking, which is Dennis, but she thinks it's a boy, so she leaves. Neil then runs after her and uses his powers to get on the bus she is on. Right as he gets on the bus Catherine is getting of it, so he runs after her again. He then sees Ray, which tells him to stop the teacher from worshipping him, so he turns him into a sasquatch. Neil tries to explain to Catherine what was actually happening, but she doesn't listen and leaves. Neil then turns the sausage back into Ray, then he runs away again because the teacher is following him. Catherine returns home and her ex-fiancé is in her apartment, so she locks him in, and Neil tells Catherine to come up to her apartment and he'll make food until he leaves. He makes Catherine food and explains how he's got powers. Then Catherine's ex jumps through the window, so Catherine leaves Neil, then uses his powers on her ex, and whilst he's standing there he hits him with a plant pot. Neil wakes up and Grant tells him the only way his dog survives is by making all his wishes come true. Neil then starts saying everything that Grant wants. Catherine runs to Neil's as she realizes that he does actually have powers, and she finds Ray in his apartment. She then realizes where Neil and Grant are and she goes there. She finally makes it to the apartment and Grant tells Neil to say the final wish, which will make Catherine madly be in love with Grant. Neil's arm is free and he starts changing all the powers, such as making Grant be a dog and stopping Catherine from being in love with him. He then stops the teacher from worshipping Ray. The next day Neil tries to speak to Catherine, but she doesn't want to see him a guy. When he's in his apartment he starts realizing that he's been using the power for his own self rather than problems in the world, so one of the first wishes he makes is to stop homelessness. As he's watching the news he realizes that countries are starting wars for no reason, and so much more so he decides to stop every wish that he did. After realizing that Catherine doesn't want to see him no more, he tries killing himself, but Dennis tries saving him, so he gets out the water with Dennis and decides to give Dennis the powers he has. Dennis makes a wish to destroy wherever the power was coming from originally, so all the aliens die and there is no power anymore. He then wakes up and is happy he doesn't have the powers, and he sees Catherine to tell her that he doesn't have the powers. She then tells him that she go for dinner with him tonight. Then the movie ends.